Welcome to Oklahoma City and the creative world of In the Hoop quilting. Are you ready to unlock the full potential of your embroidery machine? In today's video, we're going stitch by stitch into the delightful process of quilting with the help of some innovative OESD products and some amazing quilting designs by Amanda Murphy. It's you. Whether you're a seasoned embroiderer or just beginning your journey with an embroidery machine, this video will guide you through the ease and joy of quilting your own masterpieces in no time. You'll discover how fun and effortless quilting can be, with results that look like they've come straight from a professional studio. Stay tuned as we reveal tips, tricks, and a special bundle offer packed with value that you won't want to miss out on. It's time to transform your quilting projects into works of art. And don't forget to visit our shop after watching the video to take advantage of the exclusive OESD quilting bundle. Your next quilting project awaits with a special discount just for our viewers. So let's get stitching. Welcome, Amanda, to Oklahoma City. Welcome back to Oklahoma City.
Thank you.
It is always good to have you here. Hopefully some of you have been able to watch the other videos that we've done with you on some applique and some other wonderful embroidery things where you kind of learned along with us, and we're doing the same today.
Yeah, I learn something new every time I come.
That's good. I mean, you can't say that everywhere. So, Amanda, if some of you don't know this, is really a long arm quilter and a free motion quilter, not so much a machine embroidery quilter. Would that be?
It's my secret. Okay, so I mean, my passion is quilting, right? Whether it's ruler work, whether it's free motion, whether it's taking those techniques and combining them with digitized designs. I like kind of everything, and I like to combine the technology in these perfect designs that the technology affords us with, hand-driven designs. So I like it all. Okay, well, hopefully you'll like this. So when I asked Amanda to come to do Quilting in the Hoop, she said, absolutely, but I don't really know that much about quilting in the hoop. So on my platform, people are always saying, please do a tutorial on quilting in the hoop. And this was my opportunity to deliver for those customers, because I know enough to be completely dangerous.
That's good enough, I guess. But
it wouldn't stop me from diving in, but I'm excited to see, a good refined technique.
We're going to get you through.
Okay.
So I figured we would start kind of talking to you about quilting designs in general, because you have designed a lot of quilting designs for us. Mm-hmm. We offer them on our website, which is OESD.com, both in the domestic file formats, meaning for your embroidery machine, as well as long arm formats for if you have a long arm quilting machine that has automation, right?
Right.
So when you design, you kind of think about both customers.
I try to think about both. I mean, when I'm designing, I'm usually designing a family of designs that will work together.
Okay, for example.
And so, for instance, if I have an idea for shapes, or maybe I have a fabric line where there's some shapes I want to pull, I'll start off by creating certain types of designs and expand upon that to give the customer a family of designs, like triangles and blocks and
that
things
makes
like
a lot of sense. I have some of the I have the printouts of some of the collections we're going to show today, and I think it's a great way to sort of touch on what you're talking about. This is your Swirls Paisley collection, right?
Right.
So in this collection, for example, you have a block.
Right.
So, and we'll talk about how to place these, but for example, on our quilt here, that would be something that you could kind of plop in the middle of any block.
Right.
A corner, which would be, actually I have that stitch out here, for joining your border pieces.
Right.
You have a swirly border piece. That would probably be more for like all over quilting, would you say?
Yes.
Because that's tough to fit into a border.
Right.
But then you do have just a straight border piece.
Right. So typically in the long arm world, we call these edge to edge because it's a repeating design that goes across.
That makes sense.
And sometimes in a border, you would want it straight. But then sometimes as an all over pattern, it can look more fluid if it has a little wave to it.
They kind of nest together. So 2 kinds of borders, and then a triangle.
Right.
Right. And we'll actually be placing this triangle into that triangle. So you have all of the elements that together should fit most quilting blocks and types, right?
Right.
So we have our swirls paisley. We have daisies here. I like this collection a lot because you have the individual flowers as well. So you can kind of...
Well, you know, what those are really good for is you plop them in the center of the block and then you free motion around it. And then people think you're really good at free motion because they think you free motioned the flower.
I like it. It's all little tricks of the trade. So those are very cool. And then as well as the corners and the triangles and the border pieces. So lots of different things. So when we talk later on about the bundle, we are including these designs, in case you didn't know that already. But we're including the collection, the ribbon candy, the daisies, and the swirls paisley, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So for quilting in the hoop, a lot of people think about edge to edge as the only way to do that. And we will talk about the best way to do edge to edge when keeping your line straight and not ending up all sort of cockeyed. And we will also talk about how to place the designs into piece blocks. So
Yes.
We're going to talk about all the stuff.
Sounds good.
All right. So let's get set up here and we will be right back with our next segment. And we're back. So let's talk about the products that you're going to need to quilt in the hoop. It's a little different than a typical embroidery project because you actually don't need stabilizer in your hoop behind your project, right? And I think this is something even you who knows a little bit about...
I know a little enough to be dangerous, right. I told you.
Yes, so you know you don't need to stabilize behind your quilt sandwich.
Right, because you already have this thickness.
Exactly. There's
doing
no
that job for
stretch or give in your quilt sandwich. You have your quilt top, your batting, and your backing. So you're actually just going to hoop the quilt by itself, which is really handy. And we're going to talk about different kinds of hoops in a second. But sometimes you may need a stabilizer when you get to the edge of your quilt. And you can see a little bit here on screen. If you are quilting and part of your design ends up off the quilt, you need obviously something behind it or else you're going to have trouble. I like to leave extra batting and backing, probably wider than I would, more like if you were sending it to a long armor than I would do if I had this and I was going to quilt it on my own machine.
You know, it's funny because a lot of times in borders, if you're free motioning or doing ruler work, you want that same thing because you need something to be under the ruler at the edge of the quilt top. So it's always better to have too much than too little.
But let's just say you ran out of, you didn't have a big enough piece of fabric. I know if I'm making a quilt top and I need, I've pieced 2 pieces of backing together and it's just big enough, I'm not going to put a whole other piece on to, we're going to fudge quilters. We try and save where we can, right? So we use a product called Ultra Clean and Tear Plus to make sort of a fake leader. So this is actually sticky stabilizer. This is our Ultra Clean and Tear Plus tearaway. And it is, I've cut some pieces so you can see it. It's got a paper backing on it. And normally you would put this in the hoop and then score away this paper top, peel the paper away, and then you'd stick your project to
I've used this. This is very convenient.
It is one of my favorites. But in this case, we're actually going to take the paper off, and you would expose. So now you have basically a sticky piece of stabilizer.
Okay.
And you would put it, let's see if I can do it without making a total mess, underneath, do it on the edge here, the edge of your quilt.
Okay.
So that when you hoop it, you have stabilizer.
Oh, okay.
So the hoop would go around that, if that makes sense. So Ultra Clean and Tear Plus is great to have, and you'll see that. I'm going to show a little video in a little bit of this whole process. I'm going to take this off just so we don't get stuck to it.
You spray basted this,
I did.
right?
I spray basted this because it's not a giant quilt. I tend to like to pin if it's like a quilt, but when they're small,
Okay.
I spray basted. You don't want to feel that little area in my sewing room because it's a little sticky, but I should have done it outside. Don't tell anybody.
I won't.
Okay.
Your secret's safe.
Thank you. The other thing that we love in Quilting in the Hoop is our tearaway tape. So this is a product we use for many things, but in this case, when we are quilting and we've gone off the edge, we don't want the foot of the embroidery machine to get stuck under that edge of the fabric, right? Because if the embroidery machine is coming off the edge,
Right.
and then has to come back, you know that the foot can get stuck underneath the fabric and then you have a disaster. So I use a little piece.
This is great tip even for a long arm, actually.
Yeah, you definitely
Yeah.
could use it there. You can see I've already got this on here, but let's take this off so
Yeah.
we can stick it over there. So we have the edge of our quilt. Take our tearaway tape. And essentially, it's kind of like basting it down.
Right.
If you were going to go along the edge of the quilt, maybe with a basting stitch,
Okay.
just to keep the foot from...
So you're saying when I'm getting ready for a show or something, if there's just not enough time, you're showing me a cheat?
You could just tape your quilts together.
Okay, excellent.
Don't say I told you to do that. But tearaway tape is very handy to have in your arsenal. Then template sheets, which you guys have heard me talk about over and over and over again. Template sheets are an amazing product. So this is one of our very few non-stitchable products. So this is something you do not stitch through. But you're going to print your quilting design out on a template sheet. So these are 8.5 by 11. They can run through the printer. And with any software, whether you own software or you have a free software, you can print a 2-scale picture of your quilting design.
Okay.
Right? So this is the actual scale of this ribbon candy border. And you can see here that there is a crosshair that the software has added. So most software, I would like to say all, but since I don't know about all of them, I will say most software will let you print with a crosshair.
Okay.
You'll see why that's important in a little bit. But this is going to help us position our quilting design to make sure that we're in the right spot.
Excellent.
Okay, so template sheets also great for trying out embroidery on a garment. Right, so if you were going to embroider on a t-shirt or a jacket or something, if you put the item on, then you can make essentially a sticker of your embroidery.
Very clever.
Place that where you're going to want it, leave the sticker on, take the item off, and then embroider, and then hoop and embroider. So that's very handy. So template sheets.
Okay.
And last but not least, we have our perfect pencil. I think that we talked about these the last time you were here.
Yes.
This is a great pencil for marking on dark fabric. So on this particular quilt I did not use it because white does not show up that well on light pink, but it is a heat erasable pencil, and it's truly erasable. So it's not like a Frixion pen or something where it could potentially come back, and great for marking on dark fabrics.
Okay.
So you need some of those in your toolbox.
I think I took some home last time.
So
You guys send me home with goodies, which is always nice.
I'm glad that you enjoy that. All right, so those are the products, perfect pencils. We have our template sheets. We have our tearaway tape. We have Ultra Clean and Tear Plus. The other things that I should mention, a couple of things, are thread. So we are big fans, as you know, of Isocord thread. So you can quilt in the hoop with any thread that you would quilt with. So if you prefer cotton, you can certainly use cotton. You're just going to need to use the same in the top and the bobbin, just like you would if you were free motioning.
Yes.
But isocord is what we use, and we love it. It is a very strong thread. It's a polyester thread, but it is not real shiny. So I actually use it for piecing and quilting and all sorts of things. But you're going to wind a bobbin with the same top and bottom.
Right. And the idea is that you want the thread strength to be the same.
Exactly, which is a good point. So that's a great segue. Thank you. And I have somewhere here my yellow bobbin case.
Yes.
When you are quilting in the hoop, you're going to want to set your machine up like you would for sewing. Okay. Some machines, there's nothing you would do differently.
Right.
Okay. So if you have an embroidery machine that has a different threading path for sewing versus embroidery, like for example, a Bernina 8 series.
Yes.
Right? If you're a Bernina 8 series owner, you know that you need to thread the bobbin area differently for sewing versus embroidery.
Right.
If you are someone with a bobbin case that has a little pigtail, you don't see them as much anymore, but there are many embroidery machines that have the bobbin case, and it's got a little squirrely piece of metal that we call a pigtail. Typically, you use that pigtail when you're embroidering, not when you're sewing. Mm-hmm. The Bernina 7 series, which I have here, has a yellow bobbin case, which you would use when you're embroidering. You don't have to, but it can help with the tension on embroidery if you're having issues. But in this case, I have the machine set up with the regular bobbin case because we want the tension in the machine to replicate sewing versus embroidery.
Right, because you want the top and the bobbin threads to pass through each other right in the center of the quilt sandwich, whereas with embroidery, if anything, you might want it a little under because you don't want to see that bobbin thread, right? But that wouldn't look good for quilting. Quilting, you want that even tension.
Right, you want it to look the same on the top and the bottom. So I actually started quilting. I have a quilt back here I was working on, and I didn't switch out my bobbin case for the very first design, and I looked at the back, and the tension was pulling the thread to the back more than it typically would in a sewing instance. And I thought to myself, how do I remedy that? And then I thought, I have the embroidery bobbin case in, I should put the regular case in, and it worked out fine. So if your machine has the option to be set up for sewing versus embroidery, you'll want to set up for sewing. If it doesn't, and you are looking at us like, what are you talking about? Don't worry about it. A lot of machines don't actually have a separate setting for one versus the other. But you may need to adjust your tension. So I would do a test and look at the back first.
Always do a test, right? And another thing that I say just when I'm teaching quilting, doing a test, when you do the test, use the same batting, the same backing, the same top, because different battings can affect the tension. Right, like if I do a wool on top of a cotton, that obviously might affect the tension, and also use a high quality batting.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. High quality everything.
Right, because that also can affect the thread tension.
Yeah, so if you're doing a test, just like if you're doing a test on embroidery, you want to make sure you're testing on the same type of thing that you're actually going to be embroidering on, or else you're not going to get the same result. So make sure you set your machine up for sewing if that's an option. If not, again, don't worry about it. So we have done that. We have our products together, and I think we are ready to actually get stitching.
Excellent.
All right, let's get to it. And we are back. We have this beautiful quilt here that Amanda was so lovely to provide this pattern to us. This is Stars Aplenty, and this is actually going to be included as a free bonus in the quilting bundle we'll talk about later on. So if you are in love with this quilt and you want to make it, you can do that. But I thought it would be a great way to talk about getting that custom quilted look using your embroidery machine. It's actually simpler in some ways to do quilting where you're placing designs into blocks than it is to do edge to edge. Maybe quicker is a better way to say it. It's not necessarily simpler, but I thought a good way to start would be, why don't you tell us how you approach deciding how to quilt a quilt if you were doing that on your long arm?
Okay, so on a long arm, there are some designs where the fabric is so busy, I'll just decide to do an edge-to-edge design because you're not really going to see the quilting. But for quilts that have large areas like this one with blenders or something simple, that's the place that your quilting will really shine. Yeah. That's the place you should put your effort, right? Because people will see it. Mm-hmm. Right. So we chose this pattern because it had plenty of big, wide open spaces to quilt. And you could do whatever you wanted on these internal squares. You could do black with colored threads. Yeah, you could do embroidery design. So it's very adaptable. But I would do what you did, and I would treat these spaces as one and take the motifs and place them like treating every shape as one. And what's going to pull it together visually is the fact that these are repeating motifs, right? Mm-hmm. Because your eye wants to say, okay, that's a daisy, that's a daisy, right, that's a daisy. So I always think when I quilt a motif on a quilt, I want it to appear at least 3 times on that quilt.
That makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of doing that in the way you just did this really fast. You did this I'm amazed how fast Karie did this, you guys.
Well, you have to get ready. When I learn that Amanda's coming, you drop everything and start cooking.
I could not believe you did this in this time. But that, that proves that it can be pretty fast to do it with your embroidery machine.
Yep. And because quilting designs are such low stitch count, they are very fast to do. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's really nice about quilting designs that are digitized to be quilting is that they're low stitch count, so A, fast, and B, they're really sizable. Right. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but they are easily resized without any sort of fancy. You don't necessarily need them to run through software if your machine will resize in that way. If not, you may need to resize in software. But if the quilting design is, if this is a 6-inch block and the design is 8 inches, bringing it down a little bit, the density of the stitches isn't going to change that much.
Right.
So you can do that, which is what I did to make these fit exactly. So these are the daisy motifs. This is actually, and I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but this is the corner or the triangle.
Triangle.
It's actually the same as this one. Let's see. I might bring it over a little bit. It's a little tough to see, but this one, which is actually, I used this and just mirrored it and doubled it to make that motif.
Right.
So I haven't done the borders on this yet because I wanted to, I needed to stop actually. To be completely honest with you, I was ready to stop. But we're going to watch a little video on a more detailed version of this whole process. It'll go a little bit quicker than I can actually embroider. So let's watch that video and then we will come back and talk a little more in depth about what we see. So hopefully that video helped clear things up for you and maybe for you as well.
Yes.
You saw we had a version of this quilt block and we did our square and we did our triangle and we did our borders and our corners. I thought we would just sort of step through that a little bit more in case you had any questions. Because you didn't get a chance to ask the fast embroidering hands questions. But let's start with just the simple place a design in a block, right? I think that's the most simple place we can begin.
Yep.
So this, I actually love this. This is one star from the Stars of Plenty quilt block that or quilt that you designed for us. I just think it's a great, just a table runner, or it could be anything, but it's just a happy little, who doesn't like stars?
It is.
It makes me
That's
happy. So the first thing I'm going to do is so we're going to start with this square in the center. So what I like to do is start by marking my quilt. So I'm going to mark crosshairs on the center of my quilt. Pretty basic. So I'm going to use my perfect pencil, my trusty ruler, and you could do math, or you could use the seams on these half square triangles, assuming that you pieced them together straight. We can assume that. And I'm going to mark the center of my block. Okay, so that's going to help us make sure we line up and design in the right place. So hooping your quilt can be challenging if you don't do a couple things. So if you don't know about our Grippy Grid, this is an amazing tool, and this is essentially a silicone hooping mat. And what it does is it keeps the bottom layer of your hoop from slipping around when you have the project over it, so that you're not chasing your quilt around or your hoop around underneath your quilt. So this might be what you need to get home. Go home.
Okay, maybe so.
So there are, and some of you know this, Amanda is a Bernina girl, and we're not ashamed to say it.
Bernina girl.
But we are a non-denominational embroidery company, I like to say. We love all makes and models equally. We are using Bernina products today because you are a Bernina girl, but what we're talking about applies to any embroidery machine that you have. So we're going to talk about the difference between using a regular hoop, so just a hoop that you would use in your embroidery machine, versus a clamp type hoop. So this is the Bernina clamp hoop that has sort of these little clamp guys. Yes. This would be similar to using a magnetic hoop if you're someone who has a magnetic hoop at home. We can pretend that those are a similar product. So if you are doing something, so let's say you have both, and you say, well, which one should I use for which? Or should I use this for always for quilting? But I think you could probably guess why you might use your big hoop versus your
border.
square hoop.
Is this a border? Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
So if you are doing something that is bigger, taller, and if you have a hoop that's big enough and it's a magnetic hoop, that's fine. But in our case, if we're doing something longer, or we want to do two connected motifs in one, you might want to use your regular hoop. In this case, you would just make sure that you open your hoop up as far as it can go, so it's really loose, so that you can get your quilt in there, and then tighten up after that. We're going to do the center block, so we don't need the big hoop in this case necessarily. We are going to use our So this handy hoop, let's see, you just kind of line up.
Because it's heavier. It's heavier than the little template.
Exactly. This is a heavy piece of plastic. Again, all hoops are different. So if you're using a magnetic hoop, it will be a similar process. You're just going to get it underneath your quilt and then clamp in place. So we are just going to... And you can use as many or as few clamps as you need. The heavier the quilt, the more clamps or magnets you're going to need. The drawback of a hoop like this, or a magnetic hoop, is that when you have a very heavy quilt, when I quilted the big quilt, you have to be really careful that your pieces don't come apart from the weight of the quilt.
Okay.
Right? Because if you're in a regular, you have to be careful in any case, but if you're in a regular hoop that you've tightened around the two pieces, it's a little more secure than something like this, which is just held on by magnets or clamps.
And if I wanted to do a block where I was combining this with ruler work, for instance, I would probably do the ruler work first, just because then this would be less likely to shift the fabric. So you have to always think about, when you're combining techniques, you want to think about what you're executing first, second, and third, because that can actually make a difference between like a well-executed flat quilt and a quilt that looks all wonky, right? It's just sometimes the sequence of quilting matters.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, because in the video, if you noticed, I actually quilted in the ditch on some of the places first and then embroidered. And the quilting in the ditch, and I did that with my sewing machine, is actually kind of like, it's like basting it. It's securing your layers together. And if you quilted, you know, just went in this ditch, there's less, like you said, less option for distortion.
Well, even if I did this whole thing, if I quilted in the ditch, I would quilt the straight lines first before going in, because, you know, there's that pull on the fabric as you go in, out. And if you secure that border first, it just looks neater.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, this is getting really picky, but this is the difference between like award-winning quilts and quilts that won't make that cut.
Right.
A lot of times it's just the order of execution.
Yeah, it's very true. And it's the same in embroidery, where if you don't stabilize properly,
right,
or, you know, pin or baste or spray or whatever it is, your project can distort.
Right. And how do we learn this? Because we make mistakes, and then we're like, we shouldn't have done it like that.
Exactly.
Probably.
Exactly. So we are hooping our hoop, hooping our quilt is what we're doing. And you can see here there is a little bit of pull right on this edge, because
So you just fix that?
I'm just going to kind of...
Yeah.
And you just try to get that as square as possible. So you just want to be conscious of your hooping. So if you are using a regular hoop, you don't want to pull your project to kind of, it will distort the quilt itself. So we are going to take this to the embroidery machine, and using our placement tools, just find the center of our embroidery design.
Okay.
And in this case, we'll probably resize to make sure, probably a good idea to measure first. Would have been handy to measure before I hooked it.
Sometimes when I'm on my long arm and I'm placing a block, I'll deliberately use margins and basically shrink in the quilting design so it's a little smaller than the block, just in case it's a little off.
It's a good point.
Do you do that in embroidery?
When I remember to do so, yes. So I think a good way to sort of talk. So this is what would we say? It would have been better if I had done it before I hooped it. Let's say 6.5 inch square. Mm-hmm. So I'm probably going to make my design about 6 inches.
Okay.
Because that will leave, in theory, if my math is right, 1/4 inch around
the whole
outside.
Thing.
Right.
Because if you're maybe 3/8 of an inch in one area, but you're not crossing over the border, you wouldn't notice. Whereas if it was sized to the block,
and you'd
really notice any error.
You're better off going a little bit smaller than going off into the edges. You're not going to notice if you are smaller. Right. So let me get that to the embroidery machine, and then thank you for that. So we're just going to place that on here. And you would use the placement tools on your machine to center your design. In this case, I'm just going to use our pinpoint placement. And my design is actually 6.5 inches, so let's make that a little bit smaller. Wrong way. So I just used the sizing tools in the machine to bring that down to about 6 inches. Exactly. So I'm just using the placement tools on this machine. Let's check and see where we are.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Okay. And something I didn't mention before, and this is a basic quilting thing, is that when you quilt in the hoop, you're going to want to bring up your bobbin thread just like you would when you quilt on a long arm or free motion. So we are just going to hold our tail. This might be tricky to see on camera. Bring our needle up, needle down, hold those two tails.
Now you still have it set to do some securing stitches right there, right?
Yes. I don't know why we got caught. All right, while I get this stitching, let's look at some details about today's quilting bundle so you don't have to watch this stitch. We'll be right back. All right, so that's stitched out beautifully. Let's take a look at it. So you can see how nicely that fit, and even though it's not perfect here around the edges, you really don't notice that much that it's a little closer here than it is
because you have that margin.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can do a couple of things. You can, if you are entering your machine embroidered quilt into a show of some kind, or you're just that type of person, you can bury your tails like you would if you were quilting regularly. I am someone who does not do that. And so I use our perfect snips. If you don't have a pair of these, you should definitely get one. These are they have the little hooks.
Do you know where I can get these?
I do know where you can get one. They have the little hooked tips, so you can get right under there and trim your tails away.
Okay.
So
very nice thread choice, Karie.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I don't know if I would have picked this contrasting of a thread typically, but I think especially for on camera, you kind of need to see.
Why not? You should live a little.
I'm busting out of the box here.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got our block place, and in the video you saw how simple that is. The other thing that you can do, and we're going to show, we talked earlier about the templates.
Okay.
Okay. So we have our triangle, and I have printed out a sized down version of your triangle.
Okay.
This, I measured the
width.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This part.
The long edge.
This guy. And I have a template that is that size.
And on most of my triangle designs, I tried to, not all of them, but a lot of them, I digitize it so the point isn't quite at the point.
That makes a lot of sense. So sort of that margin.
Yeah. Because some things don't work out exactly like you think they are.
And if your piecing isn't exactly perfect or any number of things.
Right. But if you had a design where that wasn't the case, right? You could kind of, when it's upright, kind of smush it down, take off the control ratio and smush it down if you want. But normally, most of my designs, they're a little shorter of that 45 degree.
I'm going to start paying attention to that now. So in this case, we're going to take our template, and I'm actually going to use this seam from the half square triangles. If this was a flying geese block, never know if it's a goose block or a geese block, you would probably mark the center of this just so you could get level. But I'm going to use the crosshairs that are printed on this template.
Right.
To line it up with that seam.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
And it'll fit right in there.
Okay.
So then we're going to take our hoop. Let's use... I'm going to use the other hoop just to show both options.
Yep.
Something to know when, especially when you're in the center, it doesn't matter as much. But when you're doing a quilt, you want to hoop it so that the bulk of the quilt is over the embroidery arm and not in between.
That is a great tip. Yeah, because you might get it caught.
Right.
Right.
So the machine attaches to the hoop here.
Right.
So if we have most of our quilt, so depending on where we're quilting, we want most of the quilt over the embroidery arm. Because if you have it on this side, you have to roll it up and squish it into the throat of the machine. And there's much more potential for risk.
Okay. And I'm assuming you want, just like with quilting, you want your quilt supported.
Yes.
Under that area.
Yep.
So
you're going to want to clear as much space as you can around your machine. You're going to want to support it as much as you can. I have learned the hard way to make sure that my desk is clear, because you will embroider things, just like you'll quilt things into the back of your quilt. You've never done that, I'm sure.
I once quilted a pair of scissors in between the batting. Like, I got it caught. I don't even know how I did it.
Wow. I just have quilted pieces of paper and fabric.
Have you ever
and things.
quilted yourself, like your quilting gloves, into the machine?
I have embroidered through my finger.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Okay. Let's not do that. So in any case, I'm going to stick the bottom of the hoop underneath the quilt.
Okay.
And I've opened that way up. And let's see if I can get... And because we're using this template and then placement tools, you don't have to worry about being perfectly level, because we're going to use the placement tools in our machine to position it to match this template. Then we're going to take the template off and embroider, because you never want to stitch through your template.
Well, and you could use it again, right?
Exactly. So now I won't make you watch it again since you saw it in the video, but we would take this to the machine, use our placement tools to line up our design based on that crosshair. Once that's placed, remove your template. Very important. You can use, again, when we do the other sides of the quilt, and then you would stitch just like we did in the center.
Yes. Okay.
So in combination, templates and the placement tools in your machine make life a lot easier.
Yeah.
The very last thing I'm going to show you on placement is borders.
Okay.
All right. Now, borders require a little bit of math.
I like math.
I'm glad you do. This is not my favorite.
It's everything else.
It's not my favorite.
That's the problem.
All right. So what I did, I don't know. You can see it, I think. Let's see.
You have a corner design, right?
I did. So the first thing I did with my borders is I marked the center of my border. So this is a 4-inch border, and I just did a 2-inch, I marked where the center of that is. And I overlapped those two lines, so you have essentially a center mark here.
Okay.
I find it easiest to place my corners first.
Yeah, that's what I do on the long arm.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So this thing I made up is actually the right way to do it.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it could be the wrong way and we're both wrong. But yeah, it's easiest to place your center motif and then kind of...
Exactly. Because there's some calculations to do, because there's how many of the border pieces will fit in between the corners, right?
Right. And the way, at least my designs are, I think everything but one or two are digitized so that the end point of the corner is the beginning point of the straight segment.
That makes
sense. Because on a long arm, you actually join these segments together.
Before you quilt, in the software.
So on the because you want it just to keep going. Right. And not to make securing stitches or anything.
Right.
So they're digitized, so theoretically they match up.
They have to me, so I think you did well. So I did some math before I printed this, but this is a template of your border piece. Mm-hmm. Okay. But what I did first is I measured from point to point.
Yep.
And I knew that my border piece was... Now I can't remember, of course, the numbers. But I knew that I could only fit 2... I wasn't going to fit 3 of these in here.
Right, because they'd be really smushed.
Right.
And sometimes you just have to just, sometimes it will be like, okay, I could have 7 or 8. If I have 8, they're a little smushed. If I have 7, they're a little stretched.
Right. And often they look less distorted, I think, a little stretched than they do a little smushed.
Mm-hmm. You just kind of have to make a judgment. But you're going to do that on both sides of the border so it looks deliberate. No one knows that it's a little off of the original design.
Exactly. And because this is such a small quilt, I had to stretch this border piece just a little bit.
Yeah.
So
I can't even tell.
Right. And it's your design. So we're going to take our template, which I have resized based on my math.
Okay.
Which I should have written down so I could tell you, but I think the idea is there. And you can see the end of the design there. And what I would probably do, and I don't have a pair of scissors handy, is I would probably cut out this piece of the template
so you
I
can
could
really
see the tail.
The join. Yeah.
In this case, we're gonna, I think you and I can sort of see through there. And then,
And I guess you could always use a pin if you wanted to.
Totally.
Yeah,
I would, if I just trimmed with the scissors just
right.
this bulk out, you could see exactly where the tail was and line it up. And then on this end, you're just going to use that center mark, right? So we would do the same exact thing. We'd hoop that, stitch it, and then use our template and line up those 2 pieces again. And you would have a perfectly spaced border.
Perfect. It's very similar, actually, on the long arm versus
A little more manual, maybe. Here,
yeah.
Because you're placing it with templates.
Yeah.
But you saw that also in the video, so we won't go too deep into it here. But it's a really fairly basic process.
And normally, I mean, this is just a demo we've been working on, but normally do you do what I do and you baste all the way, because I do baste all the way around as far as I can go when I'm on the long arm in long basting stitches, kind of in the area covered by the binding.
Yeah. You could do that, or you could use the tearaway tape like we talked about if you wanted to. Just
See,
to
I have that tip now.
Just to keep the machine, the foot from, you're stabilizing, plus you're keeping the foot from kind of catching underneath that if it comes out and goes back, which sometimes they do. So, borders. We talked about blocks, triangles, borders. You saw the video. How do you feel about placing embroidery designs now?
I think I could do it, but I'll still come to Oklahoma anytime you need me.
All right. Yeah.
Right?
If you have questions about how to do this, you can, Amanda will tell you to come to us. Yeah. If you have questions about how to do it,
some of the stuff I can answer pretty well.
I think,
but it's what you normally teach,
right.
And that's why I wanted to come out to OESD because you guys teach this all the time.
Yeah.
So, thank you for having me as a guest out here.
You're always welcome. We're going to talk really quickly about edge-to-edge quilting.
Okay.
And just as a side note, so you saw the bundle on the slide earlier. We're going to talk about that in a bit. We also have a great video that Kelly did, Quilting with Kelly, that you can watch if you want more information on quilting in the hoop. If you just search Quilting with Kelly on our website or on our YouTube channel, you can see that. And it's a similar process that we're going through today, but Kelly really steps you through each thing. So if you need a reference when you're at home, that's a great video as well. So I'm going to take this away and we are going to talk about edge-to-edge quilting before you get to go back home. I know you're not in a super hurry because you're on vacation here.
I know. I'm on my one-day vacation. I told you I didn't bring enough work, so I'm going to read a book and things like that.
All right. So we won't go too fast, but
okay.
Let's take this away and then we'll talk about edge-to-edge and we move on.
Let's do it.
All right, so that was the quick version of how to do edge-to-edge quilting in your embroidery machine. So takes a little bit, but really a very simple process.
Yes.
So again, not harder than doing it on a long arm, just maybe a few more steps. You're gonna say harder, but you need a lot smaller.
Well, you have to re-hoop.
Right.
But yes, a long arm, I can see it, a long arm. I love my long arm, but it does take up a little bit of space.
Yes,
but when you buy a house, you should definitely measure for the long arm poles fitting in the stairwell. That's the most important thing to measure for.
Noted. Yeah, because if you need to get around a corner.
So that's my tip for today.
Luckily, I don't have to worry about that because I just need to make sure the hoops will go through the door.
Right,
which so
exactly.
far they do. So for this, the edge to edge, we're going to use your ribbon candy collection, which you said is one of your most popular, right?
This design is the one everyone wants because it's challenging to learn to free motion that design, like as it gets into a corner. So I always get people asking for this design, and I always say go over to OESD.
Yeah, you can download it. So ribbon, sort of that ribbon candy motif is actually one of my favorites. I think it is kind of classic and modern all at the same time. Mm-hmm. So you have the ribbon candy block, the corner, which is really kind of a unique shape if you think about it separately.
Right.
You have the pantograph.
And so this is undulating, right? Whereas this one's straight.
Right. So this one would be one that you would like sort of nest together.
Offset, yeah.
And then, of course, the corner. We're going to use the straight border for our example. So you saw in the video, the very first thing that we did is we marked our center of our quilt. So just your vertical and horizontal center. Mm-hmm. This is the paper version of that template that we use. So I just wanted to show you, I print, when it comes out of the software, looks like this. Then typically what I do is I actually make a photocopy onto template sheets. You could print directly from the computer onto your template sheet. I like to print it on regular paper and then make a photocopy to make sure it printed properly before I waste a piece of template paper. That's me. Then we have our template. What I should have done, although it doesn't really matter in this one, is marked which way is up.
Okay.
You're probably going to tell me they're exactly the same top to bottom, up and down.
They are rotationally symmetrical.
Okay, so it shouldn't matter which is up. But typically I would mark which way is up and which way is down. So what we did, and you saw in the video, is we embroidered our first one. Mm-hmm. And then you are going to move your template up. Mm-hmm. And you're going to line it up with that vertical line that we...
Okay, so you're doing the center motif of every row.
Yeah, I'm going to do basically a column. And the reason we do that is it's easier to do a column of quilting and then extend out from the tails to keep your lines level. Because if you know that this column is level based on your vertical line, then most likely these rows will end up being straight as well.
That makes sense. Whereas like on a long arm, you have to work down the quilt because of the way it rolls on the bars. So you have to go in rows. Okay.
So there's more than one way to do this, of course, but this is the way that I found to be easiest because I used to try and do rows of quilting and then line up another row. The problem is if you aren't perfectly straight, your rows, it's like it starts off just a little crooked, but by the time you get to the end, you're really crooked. It's like if you were laying tile at home and if your tile isn't level, by the end of the room, you're going to be way off. So the most important thing to do is make sure that your horizontal is lined up, right? So we're using that horizontal line and the template to make sure that our row is straight.
Right.
And then I actually used the edge of my template as my measuring tool to space.
Oh, that's smart. Yeah.
But you could also mark 3 inches, for example, from this line to the center of this line if you wanted to space them differently. So I just repeated this, hooped, stitched, as we've done so far. Then I take my marking tool and my long ruler, and I basically use the tails of the design to mark my horizontal lines. Okay, so I'm marking on the rest of the quilt, and you can do this one at a time as you stitch, or you can do it all at once. Whichever is preferable to you. So mark the horizontal line. Then you have this so that when you take your next template, you're actually going to line up the tails.
Right on the line.
Right on that line. So you'll match the tail, the end of the last one with the beginning of the template, and make sure the tail of this design is right on that line. And that's going to keep you level all the way across.
Makes sense.
What I would do probably is do 2 of these at once. So again, if you use a large hoop, you're going to be able to get 2 motifs in one hooping. So that'll reduce the number of times you have to hoop. So sometimes what I'll do is if I have a design that is a little too big, so I'll put 2 of them together in my machine, and you can see if you're outside of that hoop space. I'll bring those designs collectively down just small enough so that I can fit
You do that on a long arm too sometimes.
See? We're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So, because I think it's going to be, it's much easier if you can get 2 in a hoop, and you wouldn't want.
You do that in rows on the long arm sometimes because you want to be able to execute 2 rows before you roll your quilt.
That makes sense. So you make them a little shorter.
You might make them a little shorter, or 3 rows, or whatever the count is.
So we're all doing the same thing, just in a different way.
Yep.
So I would join these, put them in the hoop together and embroider the 2 at the same time, and then move along.
Okay.
Probably your quilt is going to be a little bit bigger, but for our example, we would probably just do one more. And remember, if you end up with your design hanging off the edge there, you're going to use your Ultra Clean and Tear to kind of create your leader. Bring that up so you can see it on the edge of your quilts so that you have something to hoop.
Okay.
So as you saw in the video, that's kind of the process of edge-to-edge quilting. It's a pretty basic one. So I think that's the 10,000-foot view of quilting in the hoop.
Okay.
Do you feel like your brain is full and mushy right now?
No, I feel it's attainable. I can do this. I have a lot of machines and a lot of hoops. So
you do, and a lot of people.
And I know a lot. I have the best tech support contacts.
She's got a direct line. So let's collect our mess here. I'm going to bring the bundle stuff back, and so we can talk about that really quickly, and then we'll go over that, and then I'll send you on your way.
Yep.
All right.
Hey everyone, you need Spree Stitchers Club. Why? Because it's the very best way to get every design that OESD releases for the best discounted price. The designs are going to go straight into your account right at 12:01 on the first day of every single month. This means that you can immediately begin stitching out your next favorite project. If you're like me, I have lots, but I can always use more. Just go to oesd.com/Spree Club to sign up today. All right, so I know that you're enjoying this event, so let's get you back to Karie and Amanda.
As promised, we're back with the details on the amazing bundle we have put together of just some basic things. The best thing about everything in this bundle, I think, is that they all can be used for a bunch of other projects.
That's true.
So if you aren't that excited about quilting in the hoop, shame on you. No, you can use this for other things, or have it on hand for when you do get excited about quilting in the hoop. I will say that quilting in the hoop is amazing, especially for smaller projects. I've certainly done large quilts, and you can see that I did that. But if you have table runners, baby quilts, anything you just need to get quickly quilted, especially if you have a baby shower tomorrow. This is a great way to get
or a tutorial to do in 2 days.
Yes. Yeah. If you're Amanda Murphy and have
Karie did the
or that. Yeah. I was going to say it's you. But so let's go over this again. We have our amazing Amanda Murphy quilting bundle. Your name is on it, whether you know about it or
not. Wow.
So the first thing in it is our template sheets. Remember, this is what we use to create the templates for our quilting designs to help get perfect placement. Mm-hmm. Also fantastic for doing placement for garment embroidery. Template sheets are one of those things. If you said, what do I need to have in my basic toolbox? This is definitely one of them. Compared with placement tools on your machine, it's a win-win. So we have our template sheets, and this is a package of 10 sheets, and they're 8.5 by 11, and they can run through your printer. Then we have our roll of Ultra Clean and Tear Plus. This is a 12-inch by 5-yard roll, so just enough to get you started. It is a smaller roll than our big 20-inch roll, but a great size to to try it out, so you don't have to commit to a ton. Then we have our tearaway tape. You get 2 rolls in a package. Tearaway tape is just great for any embroidery project. Another thing that you must have in your embroidery toolbox if you're starting out. Also just something that I know I go through it fairly quickly, so good to have, especially at this great discount. Then you have our perfect pencils, which are perfect for colored and dark fabrics. You get a set of 2. Those are essentially a wax pencil, disappear with heat like magic. So those are the physical things you're going to get delivered to your home.
Okay.
Then, digitally, like magic, you will get 3 quilting collections. So these will show up in your My Designs on OESD.com. As soon as you place the order for this stuff, this will ship to you, but magically in your account, the designs will show up. And you are getting 3 collections. You are getting ribbon candy, which I think ribbon candy is one of my favorites. Daisies and swirls paisley. I want to say swirls and paisley.
Yes.
Swirls paisley. So those 3 collections, which are a great wide variety. I think that, would you say that kind of, we got a sort of...
It's a nice selection because you have a little bit of everything.
A theme.
Right.
And then a classic, simpler
Yeah.
collection. And then Amanda was so gracious to develop the Stars of Plenty pattern for us. This actually will ship to you in your physical bundle. And that is the pattern to make that beautiful quilt that I showed you earlier. I used this pattern to make that quilt, and I can say it is a wonderful, easy to follow pattern.
Good.
So that is, I think, going to be one of my new go-tos, because those empty blocks are really great, not just for quilting, but for putting embroidery.
Right.
Or if you have a favorite fabric and you want a fussy cut. I like a big empty center. So all of that, stable stick template sheets, Ultra Clean Tear Plus, tearaway tape, perfect pencil, daisy quilting, ribbon candy quilting, swirls paisley, and the pattern is a retail value of $129.93, so $124. And we're going to give that to you for half off. So a very special deal, because Amanda is here, ends up being $64.99 for that entire bundle. So I think a 50% off sale is pretty darn good. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Again, $124 is the retail. For you, limited time, $64.99. All of this stuff, all those collections, all of this knowledge, and our smiling faces. You get all that.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. We are always glad to have you. And we have some very exciting things coming up in the future with you.
We
cannot
can't
talk
wait.
about too much, but
they have to cut out on us before we spill it.
yeah, I know we won't give the things away. But Amanda will be back this summer to talk about some special things. But for now, you are now a pseudo expert in quilting in the hoop. We'll go with that. Just
okay.
Put it on your resume. Just
Okay.
speak with confidence. They'll believe
Okay.
it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Until then, happy stitching.